Hey, and welcome back to Toast. I really hope that you enjoyed last episode with Naifu, aka Shank, who has come on now twice on the podcast and has shared some insight on both Korea and China now that we've been to together. And we have many more stories that we're going to tell about those two places. But in the spirit of continuing, two stories per country per week, I'm going to continue with China. And this part of China, I'm going to do where I was alone. So I went to China for 3 weeks and I spent maybe 7 days of it or maybe 8 days of it with Naifu. And so the other, 2 weeks of it were basically just rummaging around the country, trying to gather whatever cultural experiences and really anything that I could find that would make me enjoy China and get like a real culture shock. And I think that that's really what I've always wanted is always just like how can I be uncomfortable and like what does that mean? How do I even make myself uncomfortable being somebody who's traveled so much? And well, in 2015, first of all, I hadn't, and China's just really a different playing field. So essentially, what I was doing is I went to a place, in this story at least, is a place called Jilin. And even Chinese people, when I tell them that I've been to Jilin City, they don't even know what it is. They know that it's a province, but they don't know that there's a city. That's because the city is tiny by Chinese standards, which means there's only about 1 million people there. So, Jilin is known for this river that freezes over, and then because it freezes over, and the frost that goes over this river essentially creates this like effect on the trees that really frost them. So, anybody who's been snowboarding or skiing on the mountains on the East Coast over here has seen what happens when there's a snowstorm or they snow blast all of these trees and they just become white. And so that's a natural phenomenon in Jilin, and sadly, I was going there in April, so I wasn't going to see it, but it just put a place on the map. So, what happened was, first of all, getting to Jilin would have been way harder if I wasn't, lucky enough to be going with Shank originally, because going to Beijing or landing in Beijing with him means that we were greeted with an aunt of his, and before parting ways, she ended up buying all of my tickets, all my train tickets for me. I didn't know where I wanted to go, but I kind of just like brainstormed it. We didn't really have Google. Definitely didn't have a VPN, and Google is banned in China. So the cool part about it is that we kind of just decided on the spot what's a good place for Jordan to visit, and that's where I went. So we got the tickets to Shenyang, which is where Shank was going. Then I was going to Harbin and Jilin. And then I was meeting Shank again in Changchun, to which I continued the trip. But I'll get into that another time. The travel part of it is not too exciting. But what is exciting is that, once I got to Jilin and I realized, and I had already been to Shenyang with Shank and Harbin alone, but Harbin's a pretty big city, and I'll talk about that in another story. Very Russian architecture, very cool, interesting place to visit. But going from there, I thought, okay, it's going to be normal traveling. There's going to be hostels, whatever. There were no hostels, and much less were there any white people who were going through. So the level of like English education, even in the hotel room that I had to get a hotel room that I had to get was very low, and if not, inexistent. So what happened is I'm at this hotel, even just trying to check in, and I'm giving my passport, and she doesn't speak any English, and she could check me in because she has some information, but then it becomes like eerily obvious that I don't know like what I'm gonna do here. Like I'm going to see this river, but this river is not freezing over. So the logistics of traveling, also kind of before the era of smartphones, because I didn't have any of this Google Maps or anything. I really had to like pay attention to where I was going, and that was really where China started like kicking in and showing me like this is what you came for. And so like I just set out walking, and people started stopping me in the streets, and that's like a normal thing, and that's something that everybody tells you. You go to China, people stop you in the streets because they're not used to seeing white people. Well, they're definitely not used to seeing a bearded white person. They'd stop me in the streets. They'd take pictures of me. They'd take they'd want to touch my beard, and they'd also like ask if I could take pictures with them sometimes, not just of me. Like, oh hey, I saw a white guy, but like, no, look, proof that I saw a white guy. So it was very interesting, and it's endearing to have that, and it's cool because Jilin has like a Gothic church in the middle of the city, and the river itself, even though it wasn't frozen over, there are different moments where it's bigger and smaller. So you still have like a promenade to see where those trees were or are that would be frozen over. But instead, like when I followed it, I ended up seeing what, I found a army park, and you find that in this park, like there's a tank, there's artillery that was used in wars, in World War II. And it's just there in a park, and there's kids climbing on it. And it just really felt like this is what life is like in, call it rural China, even though there's a million people. That is small by China's standards. And it is, something to take into account when you see like families and the forests. I call them forests. When you have these high-rise apartment buildings, anybody who's been to East Asia knows that they just deck them out. You have copy, paste, 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 and that's essentially like one unit, kind of like what we're doing with condos, but multiply it by tenfold in terms of height and how many are pasted, let's say. And that's when Jilin got like really interesting, because like not only am I having this like beautiful landscape, artillery, and like the forest, which is going to probably be the thumbnail or the picture that I post with this. And then I'm also like just really alone. I was alone. I couldn't speak English to anybody. Nobody spoke English. I walked in a Gothic church. I found, like the Last Supper. And the Last Supper, I'm like, I can't even fuck around with you. I shit you not, Last Supper was just Chinese Jesus, and like all the 12 disciples were all Chinese. And it was like, I mean, obviously I'm in China, so Jesus is Chinese in China. I mean, just like Jesus obviously wasn't white, but we still paint him white in ours. Then I walked all day for like 2 days, and I was looking for bars, and essentially what happened in Jilin is like finally I got to a place where I could go out to an internet cafe after walking, and I played some League of Legends. A guy logged me into his account, and I had like 4 people watching me play League of Legends, and I played a champion I never played before, and I was like all in Chinese, so it was hard to buy items and find items, and it was really interesting because I had like an audience, and the guy was really high level, diamond for those of you who know it, which is one of the highest, and I was just like a little pleb, and it was great because then I was able to ask them, and those guys spoke a little bit of English, and they told me the name of a bar, and I was trying to like get to that bar at night. And so I go to the dep, I get some alcohol, I'm drinking in my hotel room a little bit before going out, not sure how expensive it's going to be. And I'm asking this cab driver to drive me to like a bar, but I don't know the word for bar, and I don't have like Google Translate. I can't just like whip it out and download Chinese and see what happens with that. It didn't work that way, or at least unless you had like a VPN, and a VPN wasn't necessarily something that people were traveling with in 2015, and definitely not me, because realistically I wanted it to be a hard mode. So I ended up getting to this bar. Like the guy drove around for a while, and I get to this bar, and it was amazing because this old man, he's a doctor. He invites me out of this table because obviously a white guy walks in, and they invite me, and obviously just like I said with Shank, there's all kinds of food, fruit, and alcohol on the table, and that's kind of how they drink. Except it wasn't like normal karaoke; it was an actual kind of Western karaoke where there was just a stage, and everybody would take their turns going on. But then I was the token white guy, so everyone would come to our table and was talking to us, and they're buying me shots, and you're not allowed to refuse a shot. If somebody goes gombe to you, not gombe. I'm sorry, I'm speaking Korean, but gambe, I think, in Mandarin to you. So they say cheers, like it's disrespectful for you to not do it. So you drink the shot, you do whatever. This is not a shot. This is mate. And so, then they're starting to choose songs for me, and they're putting like Michael Jackson and everything, and they have me dancing on stage, and they had a fog machine, they had a bubble machine, like legit. It was really cool. And, I was pretty much taken out, and I didn't need to pay for anything, which is great when you're traveling on a budget. And then I went home and then continued walking around Jilin for another day. And then I got like the name of a famous bar. So the next night I went out to this bar, and this is where Jilin became amazing. So, back then nightlife was a big part of me traveling, and it still is. I still think that going out is a good way to experience a different part of the culture. Like if you go to Colombia and you're not going to salsa dance, I mean, did you really go to Colombia? So I wanted to go to this place called the Mayflower, and apparently there's a Mayflower in like every major Chinese city. And I end up at this Mayflower, and it's not a bar at all. It's basically a club, but there's this whole bar area. There's this whole like, obviously a bar, but as well as like seats, but standing seats and tables. And so there's no real place to stand without being either at a table or on the dance floor. So it's very inconvenient for for dancing if you want to have a drink. Sorry, if for drinking if you don't want to dance. But essentially, I kind of finished my beer quickly, and I get on a dance floor, and then I realized that I'm the white guy, and everybody's looking at me, and everyone wants to dance with me, which is endearing because obviously, again, like I was a single white guy, so this was like, okay, maybe I can get a cute Chinese girl to come to my hotel room with me. That wasn't the goal. But I was dancing and I was getting into it. Then next thing I know, everybody was following whatever dance I was doing. So whatever song was playing at the time, and know that it wasn't this song, the Macarena, but that's the dance that I started doing. And if you know the Macarena dance, then you know that it's hilarious because I have this entire club doing the Macarena, and they probably don't even know what the Macarena is, but they're following me and they're going with it. And then after that, I become like a minor celebrity inside this club, which is amazing because now everybody's inviting me to their tables and they're giving me shots of, of what Chinese people drink, whiskey with sweetened green tea. So like Chivas and green tea, or Johnny Walker green tea, but not mate green tea, like sweetened, that sugary, syrupy stuff that we all know and love. So essentially, while I'm drinking at this table, at some point the stage goes up, or the dance floor goes up and becomes a stage, like it literally just lifted up. And then these dancers come out, and I was like, okay, this is sick, dude. Jilin is not as small as I thought. And it was white people. And there was one, like, dark guy, one black guy who was just there, and he was singing in Chinese, and everyone was losing their minds. Everyone was freaking out and, like, booming with it, and it was like crazy ambiance. So I was freaking out because I hadn't seen a white person in actually like 48 hours. I hadn't said any like English words really beyond like at the League of Legends cafe, or trying to like talk to a cab driver with like English words like bar, bar. Essentially, when they finished like their performance, I went to try to talk to them. They didn't even speak English. The guy spoke perfect Mandarin, obviously, but they were Ukrainian, so it was like a different situation. And that other guy was actually from the West Indies, but he wasn't from an English island, so he spoke Spanish. So it was just like and I didn't speak Spanish at the time, so it was just like a real like one little microcosm of multiculturalism right then and there at the moment in Jilin, and they were just there for that one night. So I really lucked out, and Jilin was such a great experience for that. Not just the fact that I had like the tranquility and the stress of kind of not speaking English for 48 hours and really needing to like maneuver things and buy things, like going to a restaurant and just saying like that, and because they don't have pictures on the menus are on the wall, and it's just Chinese characters. So luckily I learned a few characters for like noodles and dumplings, so I would have more or less of an idea of what I might be ordering if I chose something that had characters that I recognized. But actually, like, Jilin was one of my favorite places in China because I had two wildly different nights out where I, went out and was invited with this, 60-year-old doctor and all of his friends to drink, and they forced me to sing Michael Jackson. The other night, I'm there and I'm like the celebrity on a dance floor, and yet at the same time, there's like these other guys who are way bigger celebrities somehow, but, they didn't get, well, I mean, they got the attention, but they had the attention because they had a show, and yet I was still like partying all night, and I ended up going home like relatively early. I had a train to catch, but it was all like, it was cool because it was controlled and never felt unsafe, and that was one of the biggest fears about going to China and being on my own, as well as like, as much as it gives me the freedom to do what I want, it also, I'm distancing myself from the guy who could definitely get me out of any weird situations, which would be Shank or Naifu, because he was with his family, he was visiting family. That's why he went to China. And as I explained in the last episode, I bought the ticket last minute. So that was pretty much it for Jilin. I still have a lot more to say about China. I have stories in Harbin. I have way more stories in Shanghai. I already told one earlier on about this club up in like the 70th floor. If you haven't heard it, go check it out. It's one of my favorite stories of China. But I do have a lot more in Shanghai and Shanghai area, and people that I've met that influenced like the rest of my trip in China from there. So I will have another China week, but it probably won't come until like, maybe another 20 or so countries hit the pavement. So what I'm trying to say is thank you guys for listening. I really hope that you're enjoying this like I'm doing a little bit of a different setup every single time I podcast to test it out to see how I feel. And I would love to hear your feedback. And I would also love to hear if there are any countries that I've been to, which, at this rate, a lot of countries that you guys want to go to, I've been to. That you would like to hear stories about, or even cities or things like that, or types of stories. If there are any suggestions for stories that you want me to tell, then I would be more than happy to tell them. And I also want to say that I'm opening up the podcast for people who've been to like the same places as me. Like, let's say you've been to Mykonos and I've been to Mykonos, then we could have an entire like podcast about how Mykonos was for me, how Mykonos was for you. Did we go to these beaches and not plan it, right? So this podcast is completely improv. It's not something that I've scripted. I don't really know what I'm going to say before I get on it, and that's the best part. I just want to have a conversation with whoever is in the studio so that I don't need to talk to these beautiful cameras while I drink my mate. So without further ado, I'm not going to hold you guys longer. Stay tuned, hit the subscribe button, share it. You know what to do. Tell your mom, friends, grandmothers, and uncles and everybody about it, because the content's just going to get better. So toast out.